Right? Okay. Good morning, folks. I see a lot of familiar faces. First, thank you for, coming. I know, taking time out, from your busy schedules. Really appreciate it. Right? And the fact that we see an audience, this big, both in online and live here, that's like huge validation of where the company is at this stage, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about what Nitin talked about, networks, where we are, right? What we heard from VCs early in the day. I'm sorry, early, at Selector, and then where we see the current state of network operations. All right, I'll keep it generic. We'll get to more specifics. All right, so we want you to hear from practitioners, rather than like, here is the vendor view, right? So, why we are here, right? As Nitin talked about this, when we were, fundraising for the company in 2019, the question we all got asked is, networks are going away, right? It's going to be a straight line, right? We had a third, at least we were trying to get a third co-founder, right? Long time networking, leader, right? I won't name him, right? And he had the same view, right? The networks are going away. It's just going to be a line, right? And here we are, 7 years later, networks are even more complex, right? So every one of our customers we talk to, right? The complexity and the sheer variety of what they need to do from a networking point of view is exploded, right? So you take some of our customers, the network is not a wire, right? It's if we have service provider customers, and the scale is the challenge, right? So every team is dealing with massive scale complexity, as a result of that. And then we have our enterprise customers where the heterogeneity comes in, the sheer variety of technologies that a small team needs to deal with, right? I actually had a more provocative title for this slide, right? We run the world, right? The first anywhere you go, right? It's like, where do I connect with Wi-Fi, right? Our kids are even more so than us, but without networking, right, or without even good networking, right? We are dead. Nothing works, right? So and that's why we are here. This is critical, right? It's a utility, right? It's as important as electricity, right? And it's getting more complex, right? And one of the unique things that even some of us, when we were at Cisco and Juniper, we never saw the network operations view, right? And I like to joke that the problems that the team at Juniper created, right? Some of our customers were building with us as well. I look at some of you, right? We didn't make it easy for network operations teams, right? Because engineers developing routers, switches, products, don't think about that. It's always thinking about features, right? It's that dopamine hit of hey, I'm developing new things, right? But here, over the last 7 years, we've had that front row seat into the pain that operations teams go through, right? It's a 24/7 job. I mean, it's just constant, right? And it's a cliche that hey, people blame the network first, right? And what we realized is that's not a cliche. That's real, right? That's quite real, right? And we are, we've been lucky enough to have an opportunity to help our customer teams with that, right? And we built a lot based on their feedback, right? So I'll keep it where okay, what have we learned? Why do we need this, right? What do we see from an industry point of view, right? It's not just a selector view, right? We haven't built everything. There's a lot to build, right? And the technology is only making it more exciting. And you'll hear from some of our leading customers who are really pushing the envelope, right? In terms of, and a lot of the ideas are from folks. And that Slack slide that Nitin showed, right? When we showed it to actually Jeremy, right? He's like, hey, I've already built this. I already have a bot doing this, right? But how do you merge like what he was doing with what the overall industry is asking, right? That's the trick, right? Um, went backwards. Okay. So talk about a few, like what are the challenges that we see, and the problem statement has evolved over time, and I'll talk about what are the main things that we see, and then what we think the industry requires overall, right? First, definitely too many tools, right? And of course and the Slack thing actually came out of this, right? It's like, hey, we don't want to go. I know you need to have some bold statements, and then your customers tell you you're full of whatever, right? The first thing is like too many tools, and we go in with like, hey, here's another tool, right? It's yeah. So how do you mitigate that, right? So like the Slack thing came about basically where, hey, the problem statement is too many tools, too many dashboards. Can we eliminate that, right? Can we basically have a user interface that is not yet another dashboard, right? And what's the issue with too many tools, right? The number one problem that we see, with outcomes for AI, right? AI is outcome, right? I cringe when I see like, hey, our product is AI. No, AI is an outcome, right? So you don't go to a bookstore and say, can I buy some intelligence, right? So now you go to a bookstore, you buy books, you read. I think people still do that, right? And then hopefully you get intelligence out of it, right? And that's the journey, right? If you have too many tools, it creates fragmentation of data, right? And what we've seen 90% of the time is sifting through the data, right? Can I have that surface area of data reduced so that that I spend my time in fixing the problem rather than spending my time looking through data, right? So that's the first that's the first problem, and even the first objection, right? That everybody should have, right? Hey, like another tool, really, right? It's just going to create sprawl in terms of where my the data resides, right? And this is a real problem. We see some enterprises, right? In some of our larger customers, 20, 30 plus tools just for networks, right? That's insane. If you look at it, right? That's really, really difficult, for teams to process, for teams to engage with, right? What that leads to is too much noise, right? Every system, right? I'll talk a little bit about this, not just from a noise point of view, from really outcomes that folks are looking for, right? And we clearly see this. We're talking to a large enterprise, right? And they have, in their network, they have 2.5 million alerts per month, right? I'm not making this up. This is from them. Right? It's not a massive network in terms of what they have told us. 2.5 million million alerts a month. The team is like 10 people, right? Like my read is they're not looking at it, right? It's just there. It needs to pass the compliance tick mark, but they are reacting when somebody's picking up the phone and yelling. And that we've heard from a wide range of customers that we've spoken to, right? My alert that I really act upon is a phone call that my services are down, right? And this is a direct impact of too many tools, not having data discipline, right? And most the prior generation of tools, they're like, hey, we don't we don't care, but they were built at a time where the customer is responsible for the outcome, right? One of the big changes from SaaS to AI, and if you read some of the industry literature, is enterprises are like, hey, you own the outcome as a vendor, right? Like you need to prove that noise is reduced. That's not my job, right? If you're basically promising AI, right, that's the real outcome, right? That noise has to be reduced. So how do you do that? It's a very collaborative effort in terms of how you do that, right? And what that leads to, right? How do you reduce the noise? Right? The number one thing, right, that you use to reduce noise is, how do you get away from manual correlations? To put it a different way, how do you get away from tribal knowledge, right? So there are always those experts that know, oh, I saw this, right? I can thread that, needle in terms of, like A and B and C, right? How do you get away from that tribal knowledge? Because you need to call that person, right? Or you need to call folks that have expertise, right? So we are working with a large organization, right? And they gave us some data points on what they are looking from an outcome point of view. For every P1 incident that they have 300 engineers on the call till it's resolved. 300, right? And that 300 is doing the correlation, right? It's a human effort, right? And if there is one outcome that everybody requires, it's how do you get this to automation, right? How do you move away from 300 people or the subject matter experts, with tribal knowledge, having to be on that call, right? And even more important is correlation is not root cause, right? And the reason I put this here is, right? Folks ask like, you do root cause, right? Root cause, machines can do correlation, right? And they can do correlation, a lot of tuning, right? There is no, hey, here is, correlation is not a product. Just like, AI is not a product. Correlation just doesn't come naturally, to machine learning or AI, right? Every environment is different, right? So it requires basically, a level of tuning, a level of operational expertise that takes some time to settle down, right? And then the usual reason that correlation alone is not sufficient is people mistake that for root cause, right? And why do you need root cause, right? The holy grail that everybody wants to get to is, hey, I want to get to automation from a remediation point of view, right? And correlation alone, root cause is important, right? It's a logical next step that every system needs to have, once you have a good correlation use case in place. Otherwise, folks start to lose confidence, right? I like to say, one person's root cause is another person's correlation, correlation, right? There are different layers. What is exactly the root cause? And that requires context. That requires domain, expertise, right? And when we are out, talking to venture capitalists, or when we're talking to execs, right? They're like, hey, we already have, Datadog. Why do we need this, right? I don't think Datadog understands what a network is, right? Just like we don't, understand, intricacies of, what developers and applications do from, from a network point of view, right? You need that context, right? And you need not just domain context. You need context from every deployment point of view, right? How did you deploy? What are the service dependencies, right? And that basically is the next step that is required to make this fully automated, right? How do you get to remediation? It's still a journey, right? And this is an important step towards getting there, right? And and once you have a basic working solution, right? That typically is when we move from engineering to operations, right? NOC teams, right? And then we come to a screeching halt, typically on adoption, right? This is too cryptic. This I don't understand. Sorry. Okay. I don't understand what I'm looking at, right? Every tool has its own user interface, right? Some of our customers have shown us what their existing alerting systems look like, right? When I look at it, and I've been in networking now 30 years, I can't make out, and most of them are products that we've built, right? Really, this is the stuff that you're processing. It's very, very cryptic, right? And we think we have the best UI. So does every other tool and vendor, right? It's still for a team looking at these outputs, it's still cryptic, right? So how do you simplify this? Right, we'll talk a little bit about this. And observability basically, and when you look at what monitoring does, right, most of the tools, right, hey, and I have, I'm looking at devices, I'm looking at links, right. That's not the way, operations teams, engineering teams are looking at, what they need to do, right. So they're looking at it in terms of what's my business level objectives, what's my service, objectives, right. How do I map my infrastructure to what the business requires, right? So how do I get, is my service failing? All of you, you architect networks that are, they have redundancy, right? So I don't have to react to every single point failure, right? Is my service level objective being met, right? And is my business, do I have a network supporting, a hotel chain, or do I have a network that is supporting basically, enterprise services, right? How do you map that to network and infrastructure? And that's really observability, because then, you can react based on, service level issues rather than just, low-lying infrastructure level issues. Of course, you still need to fix eventually the infrastructure level issues, but you need to start with, is my service working, right? So how do you map the business to the infrastructure, right? Which basically, to have good outcomes with AI and machine learning, right, is not just about data from your infrastructure, but it's metadata. How are things related? How is my data informing how my business is run, all right? And we see observability and monitoring being used interchangeably, and that is a misnomer, right? You need to basically map your business and your outcomes to the data that you have, right? Because execs, they're not interested in, is a device down, right? They're like, hey, is my service up, right? The 300 people on a call, what is it really impacting? They're not there because a switch is down or a provider circuit, is flooding. They are there because they have a service level issue. How do you map that, right? And then the last, of course, stage is, once you get these, right, how do you get to automated remediation, right? Very, very few teams that we see are there. We have a few teams, we see that, and who thought through these problems. Oh, sorry. Remediation. It's an appropriate appropriate thing, right?
People get ready to join the call.
Yeah. So, right. So, I'm going to say, hey, all of this is AI, right? Because we have to, right? It's, as even the receptionist downstairs is like, are you the AI people, right? Yeah, it's stages, right? And again, as I said, AI is the outcome. There is, if you talk to most execs, AI is ChatGPT, right? Not really, right? It's almost the end stage where you can get to that language, right? It has a lot of potential, we'll demonstrate that through the day, right? You'll hear it from actual practitioners, right? It's got tremendous value, but you have to set it up, right? You and I, right? My naive view is, hey, like, why don't I just send this data to OpenAI, just dump it, right? And it should tell me what's broken, right? And I think that Google and OpenAI would love that. Send me petabytes of data, right? No, you have to set it up. You have to curate it, right? That's the last stage, but it's got a lot of potential, right? So first, tools consolidation, right? I think it starts here, right? It's not a day one thing, right? For you to get rid of everything, right? But what we've seen, right? Most of the previous generation of tools were built at a time where you had to build a lot of the underlying infrastructure yourself, right? That's not the case anymore, right? You don't need, for every type of data, right? For every workflow that you have, there is a ton of open source, solutions out there. Of course, somebody needs to take in, integrate that, make it available, from a networking point of view. We don't need separate tools for config and metrics and logs and alerts, right? A consolidated tool, will get to, that first step, right? Data cleanliness, right? And what we've seen is that initial step is the toughest, right? How do you get the data to a point where it makes sense for you to apply more automated learning, more machine learning, right? And this is a bear, right? And this is not a simple process, right? It's taken us with some of our engagements a year and a half to do this, right? It's because if you do this right, then you can start to build on top of that, right? And we see our smartest customers, they are able to understand that this is that first step, right? That you need, right? And tools consolidation is two things. One, there are options where you don't need multiple tools for each type of data, or is there a way to for one tool that can take a combination of data in, right? And I think the key here is do not decouple the data and the intelligence layers, right? So there are a lot of tools like, hey, I can get in, once another tool processes it, determines what the issue is, send me and then I'll correlate, and I'll apply machine learning. The context is lost, right? That's that observability, right? You need to have a tool that understands the domain, the context, right? The business and the domain context before you can make sense of it, right? So if you're at the end stage of processing, too late, right? And this is, we've seen a lot of frustration, like, hey, I was using a netcool before, I was replaced it with something that says I'm an AI-based netcool, but I have to write all these rules because that underlying context is lost. And you have to know what that initial data is telling you, right? And tools consolidation is one important step in getting there, right? Either replacing what you have, or hey, you need to have one common point for where the data resides, right? And then how do you cut the noise, right? Before AI, before LLMs and ChatGPT, right? Like real AI is machine learning, right? How do you take in a wide variety of techniques to eliminate things like rules and eliminate regex based processing, right? I have to say bold things, eliminate. I know it's still there, right? It's not going to go away, right? I wish operations teams and NOC teams, right? We are like, I have 7,000 rules, one for every enterprise that I have, right? And we hear that, right? How do I get away from that? You have to you have to normalize, right? You have to basically give up some like fine-grained granularity and control that you've typically had, and trust that machine learning will with the right tuning will get there, right? And that's one way to eliminate noise. If you have 7,000 rules, people don't understand what is there anymore, right? And machine learning also allows you, once you have the data, once you have a data hypervisor, so to speak, that normalizes the data, then you can make it domain agnostic, right? Right? Like we are very often asked, like, hey, how can a small team support so many use cases? It's this, right? Like the machine learning layer has to be domain agnostic, right? You need to be able to. That's why having that data and domain context before you get to algorithms, that separation really helps. Really helps you, right? And then correlations, right? The first outcome of machine learning, right? Once you have the right anomaly detection, once you have the right merging of data, is correlations, right? It's a logical and necessary step, before you can curate insights and intelligence for human consumption. Without that, without this, like the step-by-step processing, without the correlations, if you just, okay, I'm going to feed raw data into, an AI system, right? Whatever that means, right? It's going to hallucinate. One of the most common questions we are asked is, how do you prevent, hallucinations, right? You can't, right? The only way to prevent it is, you narrow the scope of what that the AI system is looking at, right? It has to be extremely contextual, and it has to be very, very specific. Otherwise, it's like a child. It's going to give you, it's going to try and answer something, right? And we tried it, right? Why don't let's have LLMs generate, the query language that we need to process data, right? And if it did understand the query, it would make up metrics. It would make up, names. Literally, it would make up names, right? So, you have to narrow the context, and that's basically, that correlations allows you to narrow the context, that in an LLM or any AI system, is processing. Again, that's an optional step for a lot of what that needs to happen. Correlations, is sufficient, right? Observability, right? And observability really is, how can I bring in, business and service context into, infrastructure data, right? Hey, I have my network is, supporting, video events, right? But the network doesn't know anything about your events. Your network doesn't know that, this is a bank branch, or this is, a data center supporting financial services, right? So, where that data is, a tool, it needs to be able to get it, in any way possible and bridge the gap, right? That's important, right? It could be in spreadsheets, the more, sophisticated customers have thought through this, right? And they've stood up things like Netbox, right? That gives us that domain context. A lot of enterprises and organizations don't, right? The tool has to go there, right? And we still see, customers, mail us spreadsheets on a weekly basis. How do you then incorporate that into your overall observability? Because, you're not interested in, did a device, is a device or a link flapping? No, am I having video problems at the golf event, right? That's what teams want to know, right? So that I know where to pay attention to, so that I know how to reduce the surface area, right? An exec wants to see a view based on what is their service domains, not that a firewall is dropping packets. They could care less. What is that impacting? All right. What's the service level impact? Right. And then you can also of course then perform the right automations based on that. Right. That merging of infrastructure metadata with business and service metadata, right? And that basically is a crucial step towards making observability and making AI more contextual to enterprises. Right? And and over the last year, one of the big changes we've seen is LLMs towards have great potential, right? In simplifying the user interface. Language is the best user interface. We are not basically exchanging widgets and dashboards with each other, right? We are talking, right? But how do you get there, right? It's the I say it's the final step, not a necessary step, right? It depends on the sophistication of the end user, but we've seen some phenomenal outcomes based on curated data being sent to an LLM, right? And then that basically produces human readable alerts, or human understandable alerts, even a dashboard, right? And if you take let's take an example of Google. 90% of the time, I've stopped reading, right, the Google results beyond the Gemini summary, right? And I'm sure most of you, are that way as well. Right. Previously, I used to look at the curated outputs that Google used to have. I just look at Google Gemini, right? I'm hoping it's right, right? So because that's what LLMs have the power of, right? But that's that's a whole series of processing before Google can do that, right? It's not like, hey, just dump the data and out comes in. No, they have agents looking at different types of data. They're curating it, right? Somebody needs to do that for networks and infrastructure, right? Without that, right? If the LLM will explain to you happily what BGP is. I don't think any of you are interested in learning about what is BGP or what is OSPF or what is Kubernetes out of a tool, right? You're interested in knowing what is broken, why is it broken, and explain in very, very simple terms, right? And we see great potential for that, right? And LLMs, we are seeing very, very good outcomes, right? Once you have all that processing layers that we talked about, right? So this is the final step, right? In that layer, in the journey, really, right? If you start here, it's not going to be a good outcome if you start here. Right? And this is new, agents, and I think we're going to have a session on model context protocol, MCP. Right? Again, phenomenal potential. Very, very early, we see our most sophisticated customer base starting to adopt it. Right? This has the potential of it's a natural progression of hey, if I'm going to be interacting with a tool, getting insights using natural language, using English, or other languages. Why can't I talk to the tool machine to machine using English or using a natural language, right? And that basically is the potential here, right? And some of the early outcomes I've seen, right? They look really good, right? Again, it's not the first step. I'm not like, yeah, I'll have MCP and I'll get started. No, you need to set the stage before you can adopt it, right? And that involves the steps required to process the data, to get the insights, and then you can start to adopt more contextual interactions with tools, agents, more natural language-based interactions using MCP, with different tools, right? And then and this is an important thing, right? We don't like a lot of talk of like AI, it's every company now, right? It comes up with like, hey, we're cutting people, right? Easy now, like AI, right? Like pardon my French here, it's bullshit. I think we all know it, right? Nobody is cutting stuff because of AI, right? It's a convenient way for large companies to say, okay, hey, I just had a layoff, 10,000 people. It's because of AI, right? I don't think so, right? You just haven't run your business well, right? We view, what we are doing, right? We view the industry technology here as augmenting staff. It's making folks more productive, right? I can have the same view for our company. It's like, hey, we've fully adopted, tools like Cursor, right? But we're still, hiring engineers galore. Like, what's going on, right? Like, AI should replace these folks, right? We tried, I think, AI SDR, right? It was dreadful. Right? It was dreadful, right? Maybe, there are industries where it's applicable, right? But these tools can make, our lives, better. I'm not going to say easier, right? And the value of what engineers are going to do is going to get better, right? Rather than be doing dreadful routine things, right? AI should take care of it. And I like this, like hey, I want AI to do the laundry, do the dishes, right? Rather, and I want to do the things that I really enjoy. That really is the final outcome here, right? It's the next logical step in automating a lot of mundane repetitive tasks, right? It's not going to replace human intelligence, right? And that is very clear. This is we are allowing our teams that we are working with our customers, and the right tools is augmenting the intelligence and what the people there are doing. Right? That's the approach that has worked, right? There's always a shortage of people. Right? Nobody's like, we have too many people, right? Nobody said that, right? So how can we use, the techniques and the tools to address the problems to make, operations teams and network teams and engineers' lives easier, right? That's the journey, right? That's the journey for success. Yeah. Thank you, folks.